Welcome, and thank you. I'm Christa Wessel. I'm now the evening host at All Classical Portland. That's a relatively recent switch up. But I don't have to tell you that. You guys listen to nothing but All Classical Portland 24 hours a day, right? Yes! I like this. And if you haven't discovered All Classical Portland yet, we're a commercial-free, 24-hour-a-day classical service supported by listeners. We're at 89.9 here in Portland. And you can listen all around the world at allclassical.org. End plug. Thanks for being here today. And welcome to Maestro Alexander Soddy, who's our guest conductor tonight.
Thank you very much.
Maestro is from England. Where precisely in England?
Just near Oxford.
Okay. Yeah. And I was looking at your bio, and you made an American appearance last year, a relatively prestigious one, I might add.
Yeah, it was my opera debut in America. It was at the Metropolitan Opera in New York last year with the wonderful old La Bohème, Zeffirelli La Bohème, which looks wonderful, but it's actually very difficult to conduct because everything is miles away, and it looks great.
It does look great. But this is your American concert debut right here with the Oregon Symphony, and we're so excited to have you.
Yeah.
Welcome. So you're clearly your first time in Portland.
Yes.
What have you been doing? What have you been exploring? What have you been seeing, eating, drinking?
Eating. I've just been eating, but it's an amazing place. It's beautiful. It's actually, it feels very European. Actually, I know that's I mean that in a nice way. As well as it feels, the people are so open and friendly, which isn't always the case in Europe, I have to say. But which is general for the States, I know. But this culture, the sense of this literate culture, the bookshop, I've just been blown away by. I went
at Powell's?
I know, I had to go for a second time today because the first time you arrive, you're completely overwhelmed. And I didn't know where to start, and so I went today and I took my time and had a look through, but it's just beautiful. It's got elegance, and it's the way it's lit, the architecture. I really love it. It's really a beautiful place.
I'm impressed that it only took you 2 times to acclimate to Palace. I think I was here for a full year, and I kind of went in incremental bursts to the first time I curled up in a fetal position in the corner, it was just so overwhelming.
I would say yes. I mean, I still haven't got anywhere near discovering it, but it was. I decided to take the time and to do it one more time. So several trips will be necessary.
What section did you end up in? Music, composer,
I had a look. I'm always interested to go into the music section just to see what they've got. I did, in fact, buy a book, but I also went through. I looked everywhere, actually. I was really inspired. I even went into the children's section because my little girls adore getting books. They can't read yet, but they just love the colours. So I'm definitely going to take them a couple of books back.
How old are they?
The little one's just turned 2, and the older one's 4.
Oh, beautiful. It must be hard, then, to leave them behind for a trip like this.
Yes, officially yes, but I tell my wife it's hard, but it's actually rather nice to get some sleep. But you didn't hear that from me. I mean, I run the Opera House in Mannheim where we live, so I'm actually, a lot of the year I'm there. I'm very committed to the Opera House there, which means not only is it a wonderful thing to run your own opera house and have your own orchestra and really grow them, but actually it's wonderful for a family life because I see them most days, and when I come away it doesn't feel too and today, FaceTime and everything else, I can sort of be sat at the dinner table and my little one has no idea that I'm not there really.
Oh, that's amazing. By the way, I should tell you, after that comment about your wife and the kids, that today's pre-concert chat is being videotaped and will be uploaded to the Oregon Symphony's website later. So watch yourself.
I heard you have good editing tools.
Did you hear that, Joe? Okay, you mentioned Mannheim Opera. Is this your principal conducting gig opera? Are you mostly involved in the world of opera?
I have been. I've sort of, I guess, have an old-fashioned sort of conducting pedigree, so to speak. I was always... I guess I started at the piano, and I've always loved singers, and the conductors I've always most admired, I guess, in my life, the great maestros, I guess, of the past. The thing that actually you could say was a unifying feature of all of them, actually, was that they all started in the opera house. They were all pianists, they worked with singers, they worked as Kapellmeisters in this old German tradition. And, you know, they kind of learned their craft, you know, they got their chops in some really difficult situations. And until you've conducted an opera in a German pit without rehearsal, you don't know what conducting is. I mean, to be honest, it's a whole new world of pain. So, but what it does is it gives you an amazing, the Germans call it Handwerk, you know, it gives you the tools to actually to grow and to just sit in an opera pit. You know, anything can happen, you know, anything is thrown at you. You don't have rehearsals where you know what the singer's going to do. So it's an amazing training because you're technically learning how to make music in the really difficult situation. So for me, that was always what I was inspired by. It was what I was always believed I wanted to ground myself in. So I sort of, when I left England as soon as possible and went to Germany and really started as a pianist in Hamburg Opera House, and I sat for hours with singers, coaching them, working on languages, learning Italian and German and French, and then, you know, sitting in the opera pit and watching great nights, bad nights, and just picking up everything I could. And then eventually I got my chance. I was thrown in front of the orchestra on no rehearsal. They said, go on, see if you can conduct Magic Flute.
Had you ever conducted
before? No, I'd
before?
never conducted a note in my life, and that was, and it was amazing. I mean, of course, I'd always thought of going in that direction, but I just watched so much of it, and I guess the orchestra had seen that I first and foremost was a musician, that I'd come from an instrument, I'd come from, and you know, I guess that was for me always the foundation of what I wanted to do. So it was, opera I always felt is my love, I adore it, but it's enabled me then to go into concert conducting from a different perspective.
Oh, wow, I'm just imagining how much you were sweating bullets that night.
Yeah, there have been some, well, in fact, it never changes. You know, last year I made my Vienna State Opera debut at the Vienna Philharmonic, and the first time I met them was in the pit on the night. So you just walk in the pit, and it was Barbara of Seville, which everyone thinks is, you know, simple, you know, nice light Italian music, is actually the hardest stuff in the world to get together because it's just so fiddly, and, you know, tempi, you just have to sit, and so I felt better in my life than before walking into that pit, I have to say.
I can't get over the relative few number of or lack of rehearsals in these European opera houses. Is this standard?
It depends. Sometimes you have almost too many rehearsals, and sometimes you have absolutely none. The German opera house system is this sort of repertory house system where things are just in the repertoire. So the assumption is the orchestra knows it, the ensemble knows it, they do a few staging rehearsals, and everyone should know what they're doing. That's the theory.
Doesn't always work out like that. Okay, got it. So I'm thinking, in contrast, here you've had a nice, how many, 4 or 5 rehearsals with this orchestra?
No, I mean, actually, this is the difference. In German, in the concert, you actually get quite a lot of rehearsals in the German. So in a normal concert week, you would get probably 4 rehearsals plus a general rehearsal. Whereas in Oregon, they work on basically 3 rehearsals plus a dress, so to speak. But the moment I arrived here and heard them, it was made to me very clear why they don't need 4 rehearsals, because they play at such a high level straight away that actually the level is extraordinarily good.
It's lovely to hear you say that from somebody who's conducted the Met Opera in Vienna. And
no, I mean, I can genuinely say, I mean, without any pretense, is that I've been completely blown away. I expected a great orchestra, but really they've been just fabulous, really. It's been a real pleasure.
All right, well, we like you. You can stay. So can I ask, have you, and I'm leading into our concert program now, have you ever conducted Wagner?
Yeah, well, this is, the other thing I guess I've always loved is this particular repertory. I've conducted, just before I arrived, the night before I flew here, I conducted Meistersinger in Mannheim, which, is a long song. You know, my shoulders, I mean, the first act is an hour and a half, the second act is an hour, and the third act is 2 hours. And I have to say, by the second hour of the third act, I'm feeling it. You know, God knows what the audience is thinking, but I'm certainly, certainly feeling it in my body and my shoulders. But I've also conducted Parsifal in Mannheim. They have a very famous, in fact, the oldest Wagner production in the world is in Mannheim. It's a 60-year-old production of Parsifal. So I've conducted Parsifal there, and Tannhäuser, and Lohengrin. And next year we do Tristan, we do a ring cycle the year after. So I will have actually, in the next few years, conducted all the Wagner operas.
Holy moly,
yeah,
okay. So if you're not familiar with Anton Bruckner, whose Symphony No. 7 consumes the entire second half of today's program, that's why I'm talking about Wagner, because Bruckner was dedicated to Wagner. So I have to assume this Bruckner symphony is...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also actually, just before the Meistersinger last week, conducted the 8th Symphony from Bruckner as well, which is monumental. It's actually 90 minutes long and really hard work. I mean, for everyone involved, for the audience, for the orchestra. It's an extraordinary feeling. It's like climbing a mountain. And sometimes, like climbing a mountain, you don't necessarily enjoy all of it. But the feeling at the top is better than almost any other feeling you can ever have. And I think that's something that is not openly talked about. Also in Wagner, the great enjoyment or great sense of triumph comes through, obviously, enjoyment, but it comes through struggle, or it comes through a sense of having worked for something. So I think there are a lot of parallels for me between the architecture of these pieces, but obviously the sound world, the harmony is hugely influenced by Wagner. He used, in fact, the slow movement. People said that he was inspired by Wagner's death. It's not true. Wagner was on his deathbed and was getting very ill, and he wrote his second movement very much in the shadow of Wagner's imminent death. He writes for Wagner tubas in the brass section, which were used by Wagner for his ring cycle, and have very rarely been used actually since. So Bruckner really was obsessed with the sound world that Wagner created.
Yeah, almost to his discredit. As I understand it, during his lifetime, people were thinking, come on, like snap out of this. You're just obsessed with this guy. And he was absolutely devoted to Wagner, and you can hear it throughout this symphony.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me is I think, and I might say a few words actually before the Bruckner, because I think Bruckner is one of those people in his lifetime and after his lifetime who really suffered hugely. He was bullied almost, from the critics of the time, from other composers of the time. He was an incredibly modest, shy, very devout man,
yes,
who was very easily manipulated by, for instance, conductors who wanted to continuously revise his work, or was told and influenced by critics like Hanslick, who loved Brahms, what is this music? And I think people tried to pigeonhole him very much. So although Wagner is a huge influence in his musical output, I think also it limits it to just say that is the only thing. Because, Wagner, if you were following Wagner believed that actually the symphony essentially was dead. I mean, Wagner believed that after Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, there was nowhere to go with the symphony anymore, and the music that had to be done was this Gesamtkunstwerk, the idea of these great, huge operas that include drama and voices and singing and all this. So Bruckner actually didn't agree with that. He took the symphony and was trying to turn it into something for him. So I think there are huge numbers of other aspects of his musical life. But of course, Wagner's there.
Bruckner is such an interesting creature for me because yes, he was modest. Yes, he was devout. Yes, he was devoted to Wagner. He was also from the country. He was kind of a simple man, I suppose, not at all proud and bombastic, not a Franz Liszt, but then you hear this music, and I heard this term in regards to Bruckner's music, and I will never be able to shake it. He creates these cathedrals of sound. It's so grand and so glorious, and in some ways, in my mind, almost stands in stark contrast with who he must have been as a person.
Well, I think this is it, isn't it? I mean, I think why his music is so, for me, so beautiful is that any person is never if you describe someone, already your description of them is limiting. It's not true, because a person is capable of so many things. Yeah. And I think the thing about Bruckner that makes me so inspired by him is, of course, a big part of his personality was this devout Catholicism, this modesty, and this incredibly shy, perhaps retiring man. But he also had in him this enormous passion and conflict and drama, and what you get with him is this incredible human explosions of color and of extremes of emotion, which I think is the point. You know, they're all aspects of his personality, and I think that's the thing is with Bruckner. I think when you have to almost put aside any preconceptions, put aside anything you expect the music to be, and allow yourself to be almost sort of carried along by it, and just to rejoice in these sound worlds. One thing that I always say, and also to orchestras, the thing about Bruckner that's very important is to imagine also this idea of cathedrals of sound came because he was also an organist. And a lot of string players don't love playing Bruckner because it's a lot of tremolo, and they go, oh God, this keeps going. But actually what he has is this enormous, if you imagine this fantastic cathedral organ just sort of playing in the cathedral with these enormous echoing waves of sound, and then suddenly it will stop, and it just stops. And then he might change keyboard that he's playing on, and it's a completely different sound world that comes out. And there's a big stop, and he starts again. Yeah. And it's an entirely an organist's approach to sound and to structure. And I think that's what I don't expect, kind of a Brahmsian sort of line that runs all the way through. It's actually sometimes ideas, or very minimalistic ideas, figures that repeat and repeat and repeat and build and build and build and build and stop. Yeah. And then he starts again, build, 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 stop. And you do get there eventually. You do get there, but it's all part of of bringing us further and further and further to the point. And hopefully, when the moment comes, it feels right.
I appreciate that you said you just kind of, I think, what do you say, ride with it, just kind of go with it, because this is slightly more than an hour long in duration, I believe. The second movement, 20 minutes. Is that the longest of the four, I think? Yeah. So in today's short attention span society, like how, maybe I'm making a bigger deal of this than it is, but how do you advise that we digest such a gargantuan piece of music?
Well, I think until Mahler came along, they were the longest symphonies written. But of course, with Mahler, we think of them as epic, but somehow we don't think of them in the same way. I think because they are more full of action, maybe more full of very much strong color changes or a different kind of lyricism. I think with Bruckner, it's a case of exactly that. I think it's a case of somehow in today's world we always want immediate satisfaction. I mean, we do. We're all, everything comes so fast. Everything is there, and it's great. This is advancement. Is the way the world is going. But what you lose, I guess, is, as I said before, this sense of journey, a sense of struggle, and the sense of triumph at the end of that is bigger than any short-term gain. We know that. I mean, there's something, and classical music in general suffers with this because it doesn't fit into the lifestyles that we all every day, but that's also its glory. That's what's so fabulous. We can shut ourselves off from the world in a good sense and allow ourselves to enter another time. And I think with Bruckner it's a case of taking a deep breath and allowing yourself to just be taken along by it. And that's why conducting it is actually it's very difficult as well, because to trust as a conductor sometimes to allow stillness, to allow something to just ebb and don't push it. And sometimes it's just then, sometimes you're thinking maybe, I know that in 60 bars something's going to happen. And I've got a long way to go. So I'm going to maybe just look at the basses and just tell them, okay, something's about to happen. And then you look at someone else and you look, okay, everyone's feeling this and we're getting ready now. And you just slowly, you just build it up. And that is, yeah, that's hard, because we always, the natural feeling is to always want to do something. You know, do it, quick, do it.
I heard Ingrid Fleeter warming up before the house opened. This marvelous pianist is playing this gigantic piece of music by Beethoven, gigantic in a completely different way than the Bruckner is, but this Emperor Concerto by Beethoven, it's so tuneful, it's got such motion, it is grand, and it is the biggest piano concerto that Beethoven wrote that was in the repertoire at the time. I think just kind of like Bruckner's symphonies were huge at the time too, but completely different sound worlds.
Yeah. Well, I think, funny enough, I think they're very well suited to one another, because I think also Bruckner was about the idea of triumph and the idea of conflict and triumph. And Beethoven, this was called the Emperor Concerto actually after, it wasn't from Beethoven himself, and it was the idea that obviously there are these heroic themes and they triumph and they come through. But to be honest, you could talk about 80% of what Beethoven wrote would be called Emperor or heroic, because the whole of Beethoven's music is about triumph over adversity, or conflict and apotheosis, or the sense that you again struggle and release. So I think that this is, well, it's in the German character to want to struggle. They struggle sometimes, you know, and if it is with something being enjoyable. You know, you go to the opera and it has to somehow, we have to take it very seriously. And if it's light, something light is to be taken very, you know, with a pinch of salt. And I think this is the idea that it's about being faced with your mortality, or with your sense of, I don't know, who you are, your inner hero, and how that triumphs. So, of course, that's very strong in both pieces. But I think what's amazing about the Beethoven concerto is that with this piece, he completely redefined concertos generally.
Even from the outset.
Yeah. I mean, basically, exactly. I mean, the way he begins it, and actually what it is, what I found studying it, when I first studied it, what's amazing is actually what happens is the orchestra begins strong, and throughout the concerto actually gets weaker and weaker and weaker. Dynamically, often, the orchestra's piano, and the piano is fortissimo. And it's amazing, it literally is the pianist is defeating the orchestra.
I never thought of it that way.
It's an amazing effect. And sometimes there are traditions where they get the orchestra to play up because you can't hear them well enough. And I think that's actually wrong. I think actually what you're supposed to feel is that this pianist has just completely defeated the orchestra. The old hierarchy is no longer true. And the end is that essentially the pianist stands there, you know, triumphant over us poor orchestra here who are just struggling away.
I love that image so much. From the opening, the untraditional opening, it opens with a cadenza. And for those of you who didn't spend a fancy amount of money on a music degree, a cadenza is like this, you know, florid bit of music, improvisatory bit of music that usually appears at the end of a concerto movement, but Beethoven starts this concerto with that.
And he also actually writes very specifically at the end of the movement where a cadenza should be. You know, basically, to paraphrase, to all you pianists out there, do not play anything else but what I've just written here. Because, you know, he says, you know, you will now play what I've written. And it starts to be what we think is a cadenza. And actually, it just recapitulates what actually happened at the beginning. So all of a sudden, we're taking it in another direction. And so exactly where you expect the cadenza to be, he undermines that. And that became then the sort of a tool by other, I mean, for instance, Mendelssohn, when he wrote his violin concerto, the cadenza became a tool for drama. So instead then he put the cadenza in the middle of the development section, not at the end of the piece. So he went, okay, now as the high drama, we're going to have the... So Beethoven, what makes him extraordinary is that he just always redefined expectations. He just went, this is the way it was, this is the way it now is. And everyone else sort of follows in his wake. You know, he's just extraordinary.
Yeah. I feel like I could sit here and talk to you all night about this program. It's a lot to digest, this program, but it is so gorgeous from note number 1 to note number 8 billion after the Bruckner. You're going to love this program. And I thank you for coming early and getting to know Conductor Alexander Soddy with me. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.